Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. Quick show of hands, who's judged a game by its cover before? Of course we all have, and I know certainly I'm guilty of it, but it's always interesting, right, to see how reality meets with our expectations. You know, things like hype, they really do alter our perception, and I've been surprised more than a few times, and for, of course, a number of reasons. I wanted to carve out a few games that come to mind that, for one reason or another, they've surprised me. Let's jump in. Okay, first up is The Dark Wizard for the Sega CD. I can remember seeing this title all the time back in the day, and it was something that I had avoided for some time, namely because of the name Dark Wizard. It's just so generic, and I doubted any good game could carry such a moniker. Recently, I had the fortune of upgrading my Sega CD to this delightful Sega CDX, and it got me revisiting all sorts of divisive Sega CD games, but also trying this new one out. It's fun. More fun than I clearly gave it any chance to be, which has me wondering what else I need to scrounge up in the poorly named games section. Anyways, Dark Wizard is a strategy-based role-playing game that has you taking the reins of one of several playable characters to complete the game's campaign, which is pretty unique for each character and presents a good amount of replay value as a result. The story takes a page right out of the Shining series, having you and your band of warriors attempting to take down the Dark Wizard, who is, of course, trying to resurrect some evil demon god. The combat is quite enjoyable, if not on the slow side, but this pace is on par for the genre of its time. You move on a hex-based tile map, and the controls are intuitive and easy to learn, despite a overuse of questionable abbreviations. Each unit type feels genuinely unique, and it's fun to use each to their advantage while conquering your enemy. The battles themselves, like I mentioned, are slow, but this is without battle animations, and that is actually the default. Turning them on, however, is a bit of a double-edged sword. In the menu, you can enable these battle animations, which give you the classic Shining Force or Fire Emblem style of attack animations. They look great, certainly an immersion improvement over skipping them. However, the load times really kill the enjoyment. As much as it pains me to say, I'd still recommend leaving them disabled unless you have a ton of patience. Either way, Dark Wizard is definitely an enjoyable game once you get going, and while it's nothing groundbreaking by today's standards of the genre, especially with what seems like a recent resurgence of the new strategy RPGs, it's a good example of a classic experience, and shame on me for ignoring it based on the generic name. Let's move on. Okay, next up is Elemental Gearbolt for the PlayStation 1. I know, more games from Working Designs lands on one of our reviews. No surprises there. What is a surprise, however, is that the game itself is just very different from what I expected when I very first picked it up. For starters, it's a light gun game, which in and of itself breaks a bit of the mold from the Working Designs library. But beyond just that, it mixes in RPG mechanics and is heavily rooted in a sci-fi anime setting with accompanying anime cutscenes.
Why are you so indecisive? Don't you think now is the time to attack the traitorous rebels of the Republic? Hey!
Your Majesty, perhaps it would be prudent to lower your voice.
Then listen closely. The women of the Republic are as beautiful as your mother, and ours for the taking.
Excuse me, I must be going.
The core gameplay loop will still match closely with most light gun games, where you're shooting down baddies that are baked in on an on-rails experience as the game moves you through the level automatically. Your performance throughout the stages will earn you experience that, like most RPGs, unlocks stronger attacks and defenses. The levels themselves are impressive for the hardware, no question, and they do a great job of fulfilling the theme and style of the story. The pacing, if you can call it that in an on-rails light gun experience, is a great improvement by removing things like constantly having to reload and other streamlines. Speaking of the shooting mechanics, there's multiple different weapons, which adds some really great variability, especially considering they're not the usual bullet-based guns that you typically see. Overall, this is an amazing light gun shooter, and it's definitely worthy of the Working Designs library. If you get sick of the point-blank or time crisis style of games, which are great, don't get me wrong, maybe try this one as it's a little bit different. Moving on. Okay, moving along, next up on our list is Arc the Lad, Twilight of the Spirits on the PlayStation 2. The Arc the Lad series is just genuinely unknown to the mainstream gaming communities, and this is a real shame since it's a strong entry into the JRPG genre, and, in my opinion, Twilight of the Spirits is especially strong. It's a wonderful blend of updated mechanics and still retains the feel of the PlayStation 1 era of JRPGs, even though it's clearly into a next generation. The story has the player bouncing between two distinct characters from warring races, and with their seemingly individual stories in the beginning as they traverse the same world. Quickly through these stories, however, they begin to connect, and the back and forth storytelling style, it just really stands out as a strong point for the game. The graphics, the music, the voice acting, well, maybe not always the voice acting, but the rest of it is all really well done, and each of the main characters is very likable and enjoyable to control. Beyond that, those classic JRPG concepts of exploration, fighting battles, and progressing the story through, walking through towns and such, it's all here.
That all you got? I've been waiting! That's right! Got it!
The battles break a bit from the previous Arc the Lad games, and that it's just a little bit more of a free-form movement, yet still keeping a little bit of a tactical and strategy core again, and I really enjoy it. It reminds me a lot of the Grow Lancer Generations combat, which we talked about previously in our Working Designs video. It's a great mixture of classic role-playing experiences with what feels like the right amount of innovation, and it earns its place as a surprising entry into the PS2 JRPG scene. Okay, now I know this one doesn't quite get the amount of love as some of the other ones in the series or just the genre in itself, but I'd encourage folks to try it out and see it for themselves and see if it lands as good as it does for me. Anyways, let's move on.
Rend my enemies, O blades of the wind! Wind Slasher!
Okay, next up is Valkyria Chronicles II on the Sony PSP. Let me preface this with the fact that I completely missed out playing the original Valkyria Chronicles on the PS3 before finding this gen, and I also have a serious soft spot for the PSP, so perhaps take it with a bit of a grain of salt. That said, when I first discovered this series, I was blown away by the gameplay. Combined with the mobility of the PSP, to say that I spent a lot of time with this title would be a serious understatement. You take control of Yvonne Hardings, who we first meet when a messenger brings news of his brother's death. Motivated to follow in his brother's military footsteps, Yvonne enrolls in the academy and learns to fight and lead a squad of his own. There are some common story tropes here, but it's still very rewarding and interesting to say the least. That said, buckle up, because there's no shortage of story between the missions, and that might not be for everyone, though I certainly couldn't get enough of it, and part of the reason is that it just is told through this great looking cutscenes complete with good voice acting.
Nice to meet you, and thanks for the seat.
Hey, anytime.
I'm trying to concentrate, if you don't mind.
The core gameplay is, of course, the missions, which follow a pretty unique battle system that I've not really seen anywhere else. On the surface, it's just a military strategy game where you construct your squad from available members and take turns moving across the map to kill your enemies and complete objectives like capturing a base, for instance.
I'm sorry. Enemy sighted. I see someone.
Overall, though, you're given a finite number of command points which lets you activate a particular squad member, and each one of those squad members will have an action bar that dwindles as you move about and take actions. After getting in place, you'll often have the ability to attack, which is then closer to like a third-party shooter interface and can maximize damage based upon where you aim. While you're moving though and carrying out actions, you're also able to be fired upon, and this gives the battles a more real-time feel in those kind of places. It's a surprisingly good mashup, and for the folks that just don't care about the story, the combat alone will likely hold up. I can't really say enough good things about this game, and even though they made Valkyria Chronicles 3 for the PSP as well, it was sadly Japan exclusive. While they did make a fourth installment for the Switch and other consoles, it's been dormant now since 2018. Here's hoping that we get a new installment soon. Let's move on.
Yes!
Okay, next up on our list is New Adventure Island on the TurboGrafx-16. I already mentioned during my NES favorites video that Adventure Island 3 is one of my favorite games on the system. And this one being double the bits, it should be double the fun, right? Well, of course we know this is silly logic. There was once a time that I thought this was true, as I'm sure many others did as well, thanks to marketing. When I first got my hands on this, I absolutely came in with very high expectations. After all, I love the third installment on the NES, and I hadn't played yet the Super Adventure Island on the Super Nintendo yet either. To my surprise though, it fell way short of my high hopes. Let me clarify right away though that this isn't a terrible game, far from it really, but it doesn't seem to improve at all from the third installment. In fact, it's notably worse in a few categories such as the weapons and power-ups. I wouldn't learn until much later that this game actually came out before Adventure Island 3 on the NES, which can explain some of the perception mismatch that I had. What New Adventure Island does better, however, is in the graphics and music department. While I have an unwavering nostalgic love for the third game's music, the quality here is undeniably better. The overall gameplay remains though, and once again you'll take control of Master Higgins to traverse the well-designed platform stages to rescue the island children from the main villain. Doing so has you shoving food continuously in Higgins' mouth again to keep his energy up throughout the game. The difficulty here is much easier than the others in the series, and I guess that's not always a bad thing, right? It certainly lends itself as a quick pick up and play game. While we're terribly missing the awesome dinosaur powers, you do have the axe, the boomerang arrows, and of course, the dreaded skateboard of death. While it's not the perceived follow-up that I was hoping for, in retrospect it's another good addition to the series. Let's move on. Okay, this is Stone Protectors on the Super Nintendo. Ugh, do you guys remember the troll craze back in the day? Sadly, I do. They had all these crazy-haired troll toys, and it felt like an endless supply of competing brands. One that took it a step farther than most was Stone Protector, which, in addition to this video game and comic books and such, it also had a TV cartoon show apparently as well. Anyways, I keep on getting recommended this title as a quote-unquote sleeper hit. I threw it in recently to give it a go after finding a copy in the wild. And it's a beat 'em up, which isn't all that surprising, and it joins a genre that has some truly heavy hitters for the Super Nintendo. What is surprising is it's nothing special at all, really. And that's because it's about as mediocre as you can get. Now it does some things really well, like a bigger roster for character selection and their genuine uniqueness, good stage art with good parallaxing where appropriate, and basically everything you'd expect from a beat 'em up. While it lands on all these parts, nothing kept me glued to it, and I felt inclined to keep playing solely for the fear I missed something with all the recommendations I got. Focusing on the good stuff for a moment, I mentioned a big roster and it's better than most. A good surprise is that each has their own feel, which isn't easy to accomplish given the limitations of the genre and roster size. Each character has specials which take life and other cool moves to pull off in the heat of battle. And if you can pull it off, that is, there's some, shall we say, interesting button combinations that require them to pull off with some pretty strange and ambiguous instructions. If you happen to not have friends, don't worry, you can play co-op with the CPU. Just don't expect anything great. Gee, thanks computer, real helpful. Maybe it's because I resisted the troll craze, or perhaps it's because I never saw the TV show, and likely since I never played it growing up, it's just not all that fun to me. I don't see where I'd ever skip past something like Turtles in Time on the same system for this game. They just don't compare for me. That said, to each their own of course, and I'm sure that there's some die-hard troll fans that just can't get enough of it. Alright, and there we have it. I hope you all enjoyed the list. It's by no means exhaustive, of course, but I really did want to get a number of different systems included in the list as well. Not all of these surprises were particularly good, but it's certainly validating that old proverb about not judging a book by its cover. While there's no shortage of games out there, there's still something special, right, about the one that comes along and surprises you enough to get lost in it, hopefully for the better. Anyways, these are some of the ones that did it for me, but I'm curious, which games would be on your list of surprises, either good or bad? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.